It was supposed to be a dead zone, a forgotten space on a city map, a place where concrete and rebar had been piled high to seal off a mistake from half a century ago. The people who found it weren't adventurers. They were municipal surveyors, a team checking the integrity of old foundations before a new skyscraper broke ground. Their job was routine, almost boring. Their ground-penetrating radar was looking for sinkholes, not secrets. But then, the radar screamed. It found an anomaly, a void, a perfectly stable, rectangular pocket deep beneath the rubble where nothing, absolutely nothing, should have existed. Their first thought was an engineering error, maybe an old septic tank from a bygone era forgotten by time. They decided to drill a test bore, just a standard procedure to see what they were dealing with. The drill bit met unexpected resistance, grinding for a moment before it punched through into open air. That wasn't right. A camera, no bigger than a finger, was fed down the line. And what they saw on the grainy monitor made the blood freeze in their veins. It wasn't a tank. It was a room. And in the center of the room, there was a shape. The dig took hours. It was done with a frantic, suffocating silence. The terror of what they might find was battling against the primal human instinct that they had to find it. When they finally broke the seal, the air that escaped wasn't foul or stagnant. It was cold, clean, and impossibly still, like the air of a crypt that had never been disturbed. They found her by accident. She was just sitting there, in a simple wooden chair, right in the center of the small, dark space. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't bound. She wasn't injured. She looked peaceful. The team, hardened men and women used to the grime and grit of the city's underbelly, just stood there, paralyzed. The only sound was their own breathing, harsh and ragged in the confined space. "Is she?" one of them finally whispered, unable to finish the question. A gloved hand, trembling, reached out to her neck, to the pale skin just below her ear. The collective gasp that followed was explosive, echoing in the tiny chamber. A pulse, faint, thready. But it was undeniably there. She was alive. The rescue that followed was a blur of confused, frantic activity. The call to the surface was met with stunned disbelief. "You found who? Where? Say again?" She was impossibly light as they carried her out, like she was a fragile piece of porcelain. Her face remained serene, completely unresponsive to the sudden chaos, the bright lights, the shouting, the rush of motion. She was alive, but only just. She was rushed to the hospital, a Jane Doe pulled from the literal foundations of the city. Of course, the media caught wind of it almost immediately. The story was too strange, too compelling. They called her the woman in the wall. Theories exploded across news channels and social media. Was she a victim of a horrific crime? A reclusive hermit who had walled herself in? Part of some bizarre, forgotten cult? The doctors were just as baffled. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished, yet her vital signs were bizarrely stable. By all medical logic, she should have been dead for weeks, if not months. But she wasn't. She had no identification, and her fingerprints matched no database on Earth. She was a ghost who had returned to the world of the living. For 3 agonizing days, the entire city held its breath. The surveyors who found her couldn't leave. They sat in the hospital waiting room day and night, bound by an invisible thread to the woman they'd pulled from the darkness. And then, on the 3rd day, she woke up. This is where the story should have had a happy ending, a tearful reunion, a tragic but understandable explanation. But that is not what happened. What happened next shocked everyone to their core. She didn't wake up screaming. She didn't wake up confused or panicked. She simply opened her eyes, and the very first thing she did was look at the window. Her gaze wasn't one of fear or relief. It was a look of profound, heartbreaking disappointment. A nurse, trying to be gentle, approached her bedside. "Ma'am, can you tell us your name? Do you know where you are?" The woman slowly turned her head. Her eyes were clear, ancient, and filled with a sorrow that seemed older than the city itself. She looked at the nurse, then at the doctors gathered around her, and finally, at the bustling city visible beyond the glass. And then she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, but it seemed to fill the entire room, silencing every other sound. You moved me," she said. The head doctor stepped forward, his expression a mixture of pity and confusion. "You were trapped," he said softly. "We rescued you. You're safe now." A single tear rolled down her cheek, but her expression didn't change. The look of disappointment remained. "I wasn't trapped," she whispered. "I was holding it." "Holding what?" the doctor asked, leaning in closer. "What were you holding?" She just shook her head slowly, a deep weariness in the gesture. "The noise," she breathed. "The anger. The weight of it all." She closed her eyes again as if the effort of speaking was too much. "It was so heavy. I was just trying to absorb it, to keep the balance." The hospital staff exchanged nervous glances. They assumed she was delusional, her mind fractured by the trauma of her ordeal. A psychological defense mechanism. It made sense. But as she spoke those words, the first tremor hit. It wasn't an earthquake. The building itself was perfectly still. It was a wave of something else. In the hospital room, monitors connected to other patients didn't just flatline, they exploded in a shower of sparks. Lights throughout the ward didn't just flicker, they shattered, raining glass onto the floor. And across the city, a low, subsonic hum began to rise. A sound that seemed to come from the very ground itself, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. People walking in the streets suddenly clutched their heads, doubling over as if struck by an invisible force. A sudden, inexplicable wave of pure, unfiltered despair washed over them. Rage, sorrow, fear, jealousy, every dark emotion imaginable, a psychic tidal wave, crashed over the metropolis in an instant. The balance she had spoken of was gone. They had found her by accident. They thought they were saving a helpless victim. But what they had really done was unleash the very thing she had been quietly, silently holding at bay, deep beneath their feet. And now, there was no one left to hold it back.